we have some John Deere parts in here that we've just baked. We run it for, you know, around 4 hours at around 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and basically that's baked all of the grease and all of the paint off of it. And now I'm gonna go in and blast it, and we're gonna try to blast out, you know, all of this rust so that we can evaluate whether or not this cylinder is gonna need a sleeve or if it'll be able to be bored oversize. So now I can wrestle it around in the glass beater. At this point, it's just like a regular old blast cabinet. So I've just finished blasting this, and as you can see, pretty much all of the rust has gone out of it. This thing is obviously going to need a sleeve. Now I'll run it in the small spray cabinet just so that we can get all of the glass beads washed out of it, and that way they don't make a mess all over the shop when we do our machine work. So I'm holding some really big cylinder sleeves that we're going to be putting into these cylinders because big cylinders require big sleeves. So here's one of the pistons that these things use. This is a used piston, standard size. I'd really like to say that, you know, we were putting this all back together with all brand new parts, but our customer has decided that they would like to use a set of used standard pistons. So they brought these in. I mean, it's not going to be brand new, but everything that we're going to do on the block is just like it would be if we're going to use brand new pistons. So I'm going to be putting 2 sleeves in to get this block back to standard bore size, which is 5.5 inches on these engines. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing here when I'm cutting for sleeves is making 2 separate cuts, kind of roughing it out, and then a finished cut to be to the correct size for our press fit for our sleeves. So what I'm doing here is just, this is kind of the micrometer that we use to set our cutting tool to the correct size. So I'm setting this up for the first cut that is going to bring it to 5.6435 inches, and that's going to be a 98 thousandths cut in one pass. I don't know how well you guys will be able to see. I think I showed this kind of earlier in the video when I recorded when I cleaned this block, but it's just completely rusted out here, so that's kind of why we're putting the sleeves in. This cylinder is not as bad off, but it is still pretty bad. It's already bored 45 thousandths over, so when we put this back together, since we're going back to standard size pistons, that's why we have to bore or sleeve this cylinder as well. So I've got the block on the machine, it's leveled up, and I've got, it's going to be difficult to see, but I've got the centering finger down in there, and since this needle is barely moving, I know that I'm centered up well on this cylinder, and I'm going to get ready to bore it out for our sleeves. So I'm just using a feeler gauge to tell that my cutter is right at the top of the deck, because I want to set my stop and I want to bore 14.5 inches. That's going to leave a 1/4 inch step at the bottom for our new sleeve to press up against and sit against. 14.500. And that way when I run that number down to 0, I know that I've cut my 14.5 inches that I want to be, because the total length of this cylinder is 14 3/4 inch, so I want to be 14.5 by the time I get to the bottom to leave that step for our sleeve to sit against. So I've gone ahead and set my stop here so it prevents it from going through the bottom or crashing or anything like that. So I got the first rough cut done on the first cylinder. Now I moved over to center up on the next cylinder so that I can rough bore it. I kind of have to do this in steps. I rough bored this one, I'm going to rough bore this one, then I'm going to change this cutter to my second rough bore size, then I'm going to use my other cutter as my finished cutting size. So we'll finish this cylinder and then we'll go back, rough bore this one, finish bore it. So our first cut is done. Now I'm going to do the second cut and then the finish cut on the cylinder that I was just on. So I'm going to set my cutter to 5.742 for my second rough cut. And we're in a mask just for the cast iron dust. I want to breathe all that. So I've got my second rough cut done on this left cylinder here. When I touch the block right now though, it's pretty hot. It's warm to the touch from all of the machining going through there. So what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna let that cool down a little bit. I'm gonna go find something else to do for a while. And the reason I'm gonna let that cool is my finish cut is only a 10,000ths cut. And with this being hot right now, the cylinder has expanded. So if I take my 10,000ths cut right now and then it cools back down, I'm not gonna have the press fit that I desire for putting in my sleeves. So I'm gonna let it sit for a little bit, let it cool down, and then we'll move on in a little bit. All right, that's our finish cut. How's that for a pile of chips? Alright, so now I'm moving over to recenter up on this cylinder. We've got this cylinder to the finish cut for our sleeve. So now I got to get this cylinder back, and I got to do one more rough cut and one finish cut on this cylinder. Making our one last final cut.
Now you can't tell which end is which.
Yeah. So I gotta trim the top down now, but it throws chips everywhere, so I'm gonna use this box to kind of prevent that from happening as much. So now I'm gonna bore the cylinders back to our standard size. So I've got the centering finger up in here, and I'm actually running it on the part of the bore that's not actually the sleeve, it's the original cylinder, with the hopes that that gets me my cylinder centered the best for, you know, so that it's back where it originally was. So you can see we're nice and centered, that needle's not moving, you know, halfway around the gauge. So I'm locking the table down and we'll get this bored back to standard size. So now we're finally ready to bore these to our standard size again. I've got a rough cut in here because from the size of the sleeve to standard size is about 50 thousandths. So I'm going to do a rough cut followed by a small finish cut just so that we can get it as precise as possible. Alright, now we're taking our finish cut. So now I've got both cylinders bored to our final size that we're going to have them here on the boring machine. They'll be finish honed over here in the cylinder hone, but that's going to be in a couple days. I don't know if I'll include that in this video or not, just because I'm not sure on the timing. The last thing I'm going to do is put a chamfer on the top edge just to break that top edge. So I've just got a little bit of a chamfer put on there. I did a little bit more just because I am going to deck this block, and I'm also going to take out a little bit more material when we hone it. So that's where we're at. Now I'll move over, center up on this cylinder, do it again. Normally I would have already done it, but I only have 2 of the tool holders, so I had to leave it set up. So now I'm switching over to the surfacing head so that I can surface the deck of the block here. And I know I've showed this on a TikTok, but I don't know if I have on YouTube. So this is kind of the caddy that allows us to quickly swing out and switch between, you know, the small boring spindle, one of the bigger boring spindles, or the surfacing spindle. And it just takes, you know, a few seconds. It's pretty quick and easy. You just run it over, run it down, put the nut on, and you're good. So this will be hard to see, but you can see it's cleaned up all the way over here. Basically what's going on is the bottom half of this, you know, cylinder block, basically where it levels up, was not actually completely parallel to the deck here. I rechecked my fixturing, so I know that it was just off from the factory. It wasn't anything, you know, an error in my setup. I'm pretty confident it wasn't because I double checked. So we've taken 3/1000ths off the deck. You can see it's cleaned all the way across this surface. It's cleaned almost all the way across, actually all the way across this side. But it's left, you know, some bare spots in here. And I can just see, it's probably not going to show up very well on the GoPro, but you can just see where it's just skimmed right across this edge. So, you know, this is just kind of some of the funny stuff you see. But we're going to go ahead and take this on down until it's flat. Here's what she looks like with a nicely surfaced deck. And you can see that chamfer is a little bit smaller now that we've cut it down. Hopefully there's still a little bit left by the time we hone out the last few thousandths here, but everything should be good. So now the last thing that I'm doing is I flipped over the block, and since the sleeve we went back to standard bore size, but this was already 45 thousandths over. You know, it left kind of a sharp edge where the bottom of the sleeve is. So I'm going to go back in with just our chamfer cutter here, and I'm going to cut down, and I've set it to about 5 thousandths over what that bore size is. So it is going to skim the outside edge, and then it's going to leave a chamfer on that bottom edge, just so we don't have a sharp edge that, you know, the pistons might catch on. It's also just kind of, you know, a nice way to blend the new sleeve into the block. So here's the before. I haven't done this cylinder yet, and here's what it'll look like after. I get a kick of how this looks like a face. Alright, so back on the John Deere A, I gotta get the holes drilled. Since we put sleeves in, I gotta get the holes drilled again for the compression. I don't know what to call these, but it's basically to release the compression when you're starting it. And then I gotta get the spark plug holes drilled as well. As you can see, they're plugged now from the sleeve, so we're gonna do that. So here's that hole and that hole, like I showed. And now I gotta drill the spark plug holes on both sides. There should be one about here and one here through into the cylinder. got this one done. So now I'll do this one. Alright, second one's done. That one came out better than this one, but that was the practice round. Only had 2 chances, so. Now that all the holes are drilled, this thing is ready to go in the cylinder hone. I'm not sure when we're gonna get to that, but you guys will see it right away, so. Second try.
The difficulty with honing these cylinders is that the maximum stroke length of our honing machine is about 9 inches, but the cylinders are over 14 inches. As such, Dad honed the cylinders in stages by honing the top half of the cylinders, adjusting the setup, and honing the bottom half of the cylinders. Despite being a bit unconventional, Dad was super pleased with the way it came out.
How's it look?
I think it looks good.
Can you make the other side match?
I'm gonna try.
What?
That's neat. When you go to pick this up, and this hook hooks up under here, doesn't work very good.
No?
And that's the process of reconditioning a John Deere A block. If you stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment letting us know what you thought.